The discovery. The Galactic Records Department prided itself on three things: its meticulous documentation, its absolute accuracy, and its spectacular ability to generate paperwork that nobody would ever read. Located in the most unnecessarily complex building in the Andromeda Galaxy, the department's headquarters resembled what would happen if a bureaucrat had a fever dream after ingesting hallucinogens and watching too many architectural documentaries. Disaster Records Division, how may I help you waste your time today? The department receptionist's voice carried the distinctive tone of someone who had explained the same procedures to different species for several millennia and had given up on finding joy in existence approximately 8 centuries ago. Inside the vast records hall, billions of holographic files floated in a choreographed dance of data, each containing the detailed history of every natural disaster that had ever occurred on every inhabited world in the known universe. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, meteor strikes, superstorms, solar flares, all cataloged, cross-referenced, and filed with mind-numbing precision. Chief Analyst Krill, a slender, blue-skinned being with 7 appendages and eyes that could focus in 17 different directions simultaneously, was conducting the department's centennial audit. This was, without question, the most grueling assignment in galactic civil service, a task so monumentally dull that it had been known to cause spontaneous comas among previous analysts. Curious, Krill muttered, hovering a 3-fingered appendage over a peculiar gap in the data stream. Computer, display all natural disaster data for Solar System 8271C, planet designation Earth. The computer, with its irritatingly chipper voice that belied the soul-crushing tedium of the work, responded promptly. Displaying all natural disaster data for Earth. Data compilation complete. Nothing appeared. Computer, I said, display the data. Data is displayed. 0 entries found. Krill blinked all 4 of its eyes in sequence, a gesture of extreme confusion among its species. Impossible. Run diagnostic. Diagnostic complete. No errors detected. 0 natural disaster entries exist for planet Earth. This was unprecedented. Every inhabited planet had disasters. It was one of the universe's most reliable constants, like the incompetence of politicians or the inexplicable popularity of reality entertainment programs about the mating habits of celebrities. Computer, display basic plantological data for Earth. The holographic display shimmered into existence, showing a rather unremarkable blue-green planet. Tectonically active. Volatile atmosphere. Significant axial tilt causing seasonal weather variations, partially covered in liquid water with regular phase transitions, located in a star system with several other planetary bodies and an asteroid belt. Every single factor that should generate natural disasters. And yet, not a single recorded incident in the database. This is either the most remarkable planet in the universe or the most egregious clerical error in the history of the department. Krill muttered, reaching for an emergency stimulant capsule. The day had just become interesting, which was absolutely not what anybody wanted in the Disaster Records Division. 3 administrative cycles later, approximately 2 Earth weeks, the situation had escalated to the point where actual action was required. The bureaucratic equivalent of declaring a state of emergency. A special committee had been formed, which had then created a task force, which had subsequently established a working group, which had finally appointed an actual investigative team. The Anomaly Resolution Chamber buzzed with an energy not seen since the great filing controversy of Cosmic Year 7829, when someone had suggested alphabetizing disaster records instead of organizing them by gravitational constant values. The evidence is irrefutable, announced senior data archaeologist Plex, gesturing with 4 of his limbs at the holographic display. We have conducted 17 separate database integrity audits. Earth simply has no recorded natural disasters. Not one. Not ever. Department Director Cole, whose gelatinous form quivered with administrative anxiety, oozed forward slightly. Theories. We have several, ranked by probability, replied investigative lead Mira, activating a new display. Theory 1. Clerical error spanning 12,000 years of record-keeping. A disbelieving murmur rippled through the assembled bureaucrats. The notion that their precious system could maintain an error for so long was more offensive than suggesting their progenitors had reproduced with waste disposal units. Theory 2. Earth is under divine protection from a cosmic entity. Several religious officials in attendance nodded sagely, already mentally drafting new doctrines. Theory 3. The humans have developed technology to prevent or control all natural planetary phenomena. The scientific contingent scoffed loudly. According to all records, humans were barely capable of space travel beyond their own system, and still argued about whether certain foods should be accompanied by pineapple. Theory 4. Our definition of natural disaster somehow doesn't apply to Earth events. Preposterous, snapped taxonomic supervisor Zorn. Our definition has been standardized across 47,000 species and 22 galaxies. It's the only thing we all agree on besides the universal disapproval of poetry composed by artificial intelligences. Theory 5. Continued Mira with the reluctance of someone who knows they're about to say something ridiculous. The humans don't report disasters because they don't consider them disasters. The chamber erupted in laughter so intense that 3 delegates from atmospherically challenged species had to adjust their breathing apparatus. And finally, Theory 6. Earth doesn't exist. This was met with contemplative silence until Director Cole pointed out that they had, in fact, been observing and occasionally visiting Earth for millennia, and maintaining that it didn't exist would require a conspiracy of truly incomprehensible proportions. Well, there's only one way to resolve this, the director announced, his gelatinous form rippling with administrative determination. We need boots on the ground, or whatever appendages our field agents use for locomotion. We need a team on Earth. And thus, the most unnecessary expedition in galactic history was authorized, with a budget that would have made even the military procurement department raise their eyebrows, tentacles, or sensory stalks in astonishment. The investigation team was assembled with the kind of careful consideration usually reserved for selecting which color of ink to use on particularly important forms. Each member was chosen for their expertise, their discretion, and most importantly, their willingness to potentially be exposed to a planet with no recorded natural disasters, which clearly meant something was about to go catastrophically wrong. Lead investigator Noma had a reputation for being methodical to the point of causing physical pain to those who watched her work. Geological specialist Tark could identify 73 types of rock by taste alone. Atmospheric expert Vex had survived being inside 3 different Category 9 hypercanes and wouldn't shut up about it. Cultural interpreter Leary was renowned for their ability to blend in with primitive species despite having luminescent skin and a tendency to emit high-pitched whistles when excited. Your mission, Director Cole informed them during the final briefing, is to determine why Earth has no natural disasters in our records. You will observe, document, and report back without interfering with the locals or revealing your true purpose. Remember, we are bureaucrats, not heroes. If something tries to eat you, you are contractually obligated to fill out Form X-27B before taking evasive action. As the team prepared to depart in their ship, disguised as what their outdated Earth cultural database described as a totally inconspicuous weather balloon, Noma reviewed their cover story one final time. "We're meteorological researchers from Finland," she said, struggling with the unfamiliar Earth designation. "According to our research, humans consider Finland to be a place of such crushing boredom and meteorological monotony that no one will question our interest in weather phenomena or our awkward social behaviors." "What if they ask us to speak Finnish?" asked Leary, who had been unsuccessfully trying to master human languages for the journey. "Statistics indicate a 0.00003% probability of encountering a human who can verify authentic Finnish outside of the designated Finland region," replied Noma. "If it happens, emit confusing sounds and reference something called sauna or Nokia repeatedly until they lose interest. As the ship launched toward the unremarkable blue-green planet with its inexplicable lack of disasters, none of the team members realized they were about to discover something that would force the Galactic Records Department to reconsider one of its most fundamental classification systems, and perhaps gain a grudging respect for the peculiar species that called Earth home. And somewhere in the vastness of space, the universe itself seemed to chuckle at the cosmic joke about to unfold, a punchline 12,000 years in the making, delivered by a species whose greatest talent might just be their unique perspective on catastrophe. The revelation. The research vessel, officially designated as Inconspicuous Observation Platform Alpha, but nicknamed the Flying Paperweight by its crew, entered Earth's atmosphere with all the grace of a drunken bureaucrat attempting interpretive dance. The ship's camouflage systems engage, projecting the image of what their woefully outdated database insisted was still the height of terrestrial aerial technology. A silver weather balloon with science stuff printed on the side in what the cultural department assured them was convincing human handwriting. Atmospheric composition analysis complete, announced Vex, the team's atmospheric expert who had evolved on a gas giant and consequently viewed oxygen-nitrogen atmospheres as quaintly minimalist, surprisingly volatile for a planet with no disasters. High moisture content, multiple atmospheric fronts colliding, significant electrical potential. By all standard metrics, this planet should experience catastrophic weather events regularly. Lead investigator Noma made a noise that her species used to indicate skepticism, which unfortunately sounded exactly like a human garbage disposal attempting to process a metal spoon. Our records are never wrong, she insisted with the unwavering confidence of someone who had never actually checked if the records were right. The ship descended toward their first observation point, a coastal region their database identified as Florida, apparently selected because it represented the statistical median for planetary disaster potential. As they approached, geological specialist Tark pressed all 6 of his sensory appendages against the scanning equipment and made a series of increasingly alarmed clicks. This landmass shows evidence of repeated major inundations, he reported, consistent with massive storm surges. And the geological composition. This entire region is essentially limestone karst sitting atop an aquifer. This place should be experiencing sinkholes at a rate that would classify as a continuous geological disaster. Perhaps they abandoned this uninhabitable region long ago, suggested Leary, the cultural interpreter whose species communicated primarily through changing skin patterns and thus always spoke in an unnecessarily dramatic tone to compensate. The question was answered as the cloud cover cleared, revealing sprawling urban development as far as their sensors could detect. Millions of structures, most perplexingly built with materials that appeared to be specifically designed to be destroyed by high winds. They live here, voluntarily. Noma's exoskeleton paled 2 full shades, the equivalent of a human jaw dropping to the floor. Fascinating, Larry whispered, their skin cycling through patterns that roughly translated to "these creatures are clearly insane, and I should have taken that job in the Department of Interspecies Taxation." Their bewilderment only increased as they established their observation post, disguised as a research station near a coastal community. The team had barely finished configuring their equipment when local meteorological authorities issued a hurricane warning, terminology that sent the entire research team into a frenzy of excitement. A hurricane, an actual Class 3 tropical cyclonic event. Vex was practically vibrating with professional enthusiasm. This is exactly the type of phenomenon that should be in our disaster records. We can observe it firsthand and solve this mystery. What followed was not what any of them expected. Instead of mass evacuation, widespread panic, or any of the 37 standard disaster protocols outlined in the Galactic Emergency Response Handbook, the locals appeared to be inconvenienced. Some boarded up windows, others filled containers with water. Many simply left the area with a casualness that suggested this was a routine occurrence, like avoiding a slightly unpleasant social obligation. They call this hurricane season, reported Leary after infiltrating a local information distribution center, a convenience store. It's an annual event. They have seasons for their disasters. The team watched in stunned silence as the massive storm approached. Wind speeds reached levels that would trigger mandatory planetary evacuation on 17 different federated worlds. Storm surge threatened to inundate coastal areas. Electrical discharges illuminated the atmosphere. And through it all, a significant percentage of the population simply stayed. They're having gatherings they call hurricane parties, Leary reported with increasing disbelief. They consume fermented beverages and make wagers on how much damage their dwellings will sustain. For 3 local days, the team documented everything: the howling winds, the structural damage, the temporary loss of power distribution systems. When it was over, they ventured out expecting to find devastation worthy of their disaster classification matrix. Instead, they found minor inconvenience. Debris in streets that was quickly cleared away. Repair crews addressing damage with practiced efficiency. Locals emerging to assess the situation with expressions that could only be described as mild annoyance. "Did you lose power?" one local asked another. "Yeah, for about 6 hours. Not bad. Remember the 18 storm? Now that was something." The research team exchanged glances of utter confusion. Their translation matrices must be malfunctioning. These humans were comparing disasters as if discussing mild variations in food seasoning. Their confusion only deepened as they expanded their investigation. In a region called California, they discovered evidence of regular seismic activity that should, by all galactic standards, constitute an ongoing geological disaster. Their dwellings are positioned directly atop active fault lines. Tark reported, his sensory appendages trembling with professional outrage. The probability of catastrophic ground displacement is not a matter of if but when, and yet they build more structures every day. In an area called Tornado Alley, they witnessed atmospheric vortices of such violence that on any rational world, the region would have been designated uninhabitable. Instead, they found communities with specialized shelter systems and early warning protocols that treated these events with the same gravity that most species reserve for minor transit delays. "We should observe their emergency management facilities," suggested Noma. "Surely their disaster response authorities must recognize the severity of these events, even if the general population has become desensitized." The team infiltrated what appeared to be a regional emergency management center during what locals were calling a pretty average tornado outbreak. Inside, they found professionals monitoring the situation with measured concern, rather than existential dread. "Path projection shows it heading toward the Johnson farm," one official noted. "Again, that's the 3rd time this year. Someone should tell them to stop rebuilding in the same spot." Laughter followed. Laughter. During an event that was, at that very moment, tearing structures from their foundations. The investigation continued for local weeks, each new discovery more baffling than the last. In mountainous regions, they found communities that regularly dealt with massive snow accumulations that should render their transportation infrastructure completely non-functional. Instead, they simply deployed specialized clearing vehicles and continued their daily activities with minor adjustments. Near coastal regions, they documented evidence of tsunami events that had completely reconfigured shorelines, after which the humans had simply rebuilt, often with minimal modifications to their previous designs. "I have a working hypothesis," announced Leary during their 70th Research Coordination meeting. "The humans don't record these as disasters because they don't consider them disasters. They appear to have normalized what any rational species would classify as catastrophic events." "Preposterous," sniffed Noma, who had been stubbornly clinging to Theory 1. "Clerical error, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. Our definition of disaster is objectively correct. A disaster is any natural event that significantly disrupts normal functioning of a society." "But what if their normal functioning already accounts for these events?" countered Tark. "What if disruption is part of their baseline expectation?" The team fell silent as they contemplated this heretical notion. "We need more data," Noma finally declared, unconsciously falling back on the bureaucrats' universal solution to any challenging problem. Their investigation took them to historical archives, where they discovered records of events that had indeed caused significant disruption: massive floods, devastating earthquakes, volcanic eruptions that altered global climate patterns. These certainly seemed to qualify as disasters, Noma admitted grudgingly. But look at their historical context, pointed out Leary. These events are recorded as exceptional, not because they're unusual in type, but because they exceeded the parameters of what humans consider normal disruption. They have different categories, Vex added, displaying their analysis of human disaster classification systems. They distinguish between major disasters and emergencies and significant weather events, with criteria that would make our taxonomists develop stress molting. As they delved deeper into human infrastructure, the picture became simultaneously clearer and more confounding. Buildings designed with special foundations to withstand ground movement, drainage systems anticipating regular flooding, agricultural practices adapted to periodic drought. They don't prevent disasters, Tark said wonderingly. They expect them and build accordingly. The revelation came during what the team had planned as a routine observation of a coastal community's disaster preparedness drill. They had infiltrated the event disguised as visiting officials from Finland, a cover that continued to work flawlessly as most humans simply nodded politely and avoided asking them any specific questions about their supposed homeland. During the drill, a local official was explaining evacuation protocols to community members when a small human offspring raised an appendage and asked a question that would ultimately solve the galactic mystery. Why do we call them natural disasters if they're just nature doing what it normally does? The room chuckled. The official smiled patronizingly. Well, we call them disasters because they disrupt our lives and can cause damage. But isn't that just what weather and Earth do sometimes? My teacher says the planet has been having earthquakes and storms for billions of years before we built stuff on it. Out of the mouths of juvenile humans, as the saying definitely didn't go. The research team exchanged meaningful glances, their various appendages, sensory organs, and, in Vex's case, atmospheric discharge tendrils, all conveying the same realization. Humans didn't have a different classification system for disasters. They had a fundamentally different relationship with their planet's natural processes. To most galactic species, planetary stability was the expected norm, with deviations classified as disasters. To humans, planetary volatility was the baseline, with particularly severe manifestations classified as notable events. It wasn't that Earth had no natural disasters. It was that, by human standards, nearly nothing that happened on Earth qualified for disaster status in galactic records. And as the team prepared their preliminary report, they realized they'd have to completely reevaluate how they categorized a species that considered living on an actively volcanic, seismically unstable, meteorologically chaotic planet to be perfectly normal. The universe had a sense of humor after all, and it was apparently as dry as the regions humans called deserts, which, naturally, they also chose to inhabit despite the clear inhospitality to biological life. As they prepared to depart, the research team gathered at their observation post one final time, their mission complete but their worldview forever altered. So what's our final recommendation? Asked Tark, who had become oddly fascinated with human adaptation strategies. Noma, who had undergone the bureaucratic equivalent of a religious conversion during their time on Earth, checked the final report on her datapad. We're recommending a complete overhaul of the disaster classification protocol as it applies to species from high-volatility planets, she said, a note of respect in her voice that would have shocked her colleagues back in the department. We're creating a new category, anticipated natural phenomena, ANPs, rather than disasters. Do you think they'll accept it? Vex wondered. Leary's skin rippled with a pattern that translated roughly to philosophical resignation combined with wry amusement. Whether they do or not, I suspect Earth and its humans will continue doing exactly what they've been doing for millennia. treating the universe's attempts to destroy them as merely inconvenient and occasionally worthy of celebration with alcoholic beverages and competitive wagering. As their ship lifted off from the planet that had defied an entire galactic classification system through sheer stubborn normalization of chaos, they couldn't help but wonder if humanity's real superpower wasn't technology or intelligence, but simply perspective, the ability to look at a force that could flatten their cities, shrug collectively, and say, "We'll rebuild." We always do. Back at Galactic Records Department headquarters, when the report was finally processed through the 17 required authorization levels and 12 independent verification protocols, Director Quoll authorized a new entry in the Universal Species Database. Under Notable Evolutionary Adaptations for Humans, a single line was added: psychological resilience bordering on insanity. Recommended approach: do not attempt to explain to them why they should be terrified. They know, they just don't care.